So I wanted to just kind of talk about culture and religion, the differences between the two, and how a lot of times they intertwine with each other, making it difficult to certain identify the differences between the two. So, like I said, it kind of just popped in my head as something to talk about because I feel like it's something that directly affects the Black communities and how we interact with each other, or sometimes people feel they can't interact with each other because of different cultural or religious beliefs. So we can just break down like the differences between like the two, how we or what we think, and then we can go into maybe some of the broader senses of like how society separates the two or intertwines the two for whatever
Right.
reason.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. Yep. Yep. 'Cause I have some ideas about sort of that what you just said.
All right. So I know for me, I always think culture is more practices and behaviors um, of a tribe or community of people. So I feel like a cultural practice could be something like the type of food you eat, or it can be, if you celebrate certain traditions culturally, like maybe the birth of a child might be something that a culture celebrates versus not celebrating the birth of a child. How people celebrate the death of people. To me, I believe those things are kind of naturally cultural things that people will do differently across different cultures without being coached or anything. It's just kind of a natural process. Versus religion, I always think of that more of a belief in a belief system in something, usually something divine. But to believe in something versus just to perform a practice, I always feel like that's ultimately the difference between the two. However, a lot of times religious beliefs can come with practices and different types of behaviors that are associated with those religions, which can make it very difficult for people to understand the difference between the two. So some religions, they'll say their religion teaches that they shouldn't eat certain foods or should eat certain foods, where that's something that could be cultural or religious. So it makes it difficult when you don't understand a religion or a culture fully to know the difference between the two.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense, man. And I was sort of taking some notes down, like as you were talking, and uh, I think that well, something you had said earlier, having practical conversations about religion versus culture, or religion and culture, and the commonalities between the two, the distinctiveness between the two. I think religion, like you said, it's sort of there's definitely things that could just be defined in the realm of religion, and there are certain things that could be more defined in the realm of culture. But if those two things were circles, if we drew two circles, obviously there'd be a point at which they overlap, and that there are certain aspects of culture that right, have religious connotations and ramifications, and vice versa. And sometimes the challenge is to figure out if it's possible or even necessary where certain aspects originated, that they originate within the religion or the culture. Because in that example that you gave, as far as like eating pork, for example, we know that's a religious mandate, especially for Islam. Uh, Although it also is, strictly speaking, it's also a mandate of Hebrew, of the Hebrews. It's sort of gone by the wayside in terms of popular Christianity. But eating pork, for example, is a mandate, was a divine mandate, which then also we see reflected in the culture. And also, if a culture um, is a health conscious culture, then there are practically things that they also, will abstain from, like pork. And so you have a practice that exists in both circles of religion and culture. In the case of eating pork, it could be likely that, the roots were in religion. But we also know that a group of people, um, if they're inclined to do a certain thing or have certain habits, that we'll also see those sort of backfeed into the religion, and they'll sort of ascribe it to a divine sort of aspect. For example, the Bible, the scripture says not to have images, right? Or whatever. But we see images of a Eurocentric Christ all throughout popular Christianity. And we know that's probably something that, well, not probably, that's something invented in the minds of the dominant culture. But then that dominant culture then ascribes those sort of aspects to the religion. And so you have this sort of imagery or practice that exists in both spheres. But the other thing I was just going to say real quick is, well, basically that was it, sort of like how they overlap. Oh, I was going to say, and hopefully I'm not getting too ahead of the conversation, but in terms
No.
of practicality, and the differences between religious groups, uh, and I know we're going to touch on that. Well, you know what? Maybe I'll let you go ahead and say a piece on that if you want, and then I'll just sort of follow up.
Oh yeah, that's cool. Um, yeah, I mean, I think we kind of saying the same thing. Like, there's definitely differences between the two, but it's at some point it's kind of inevitable that they're gonna overlap each other, and nobody really knows sometimes what came first. The chicken or the egg kind of deal. But it's not really much I want to elaborate on because it was like I agree with what you said. And I think that that's something that needs to be talked about to make a healthier Black community, because a lot of times when people practice certain religion, they it's almost like they break away from certain cultural practices because maybe they feel like all music is bad now because they found this new religion, not really understanding where music comes from, just generally, and the type of music you listen to and the lyrics that you listen to make a huge difference in what type of music you should be putting into your body versus just anything that's music related. People will say you shouldn't focus on that because that's not, there's no religious grounds to it. um so I think it's important to have these conversations, because I won't get too specific about certain religions right now. I think we should open that up for a later conversation. I kind of wanted this to just be an introduction to just the differences in cultures and religions and how we can start fine combing the differences, and so that people can have a better understanding, hopefully with the hopes of bringing people closer together. So this is not a conversation that we want to divide the people with. We actually want to bridge those gaps, because you'll see certain people that say they're not religious. However, they'll practice, or they'll read out a certain religious context, and they'll claim they're not religious, but you don't see those people practicing any religion. So it's hard to say, like, are they practicing a religion but they're just not accepting that it's religion, or are they atheists? Do they not believe in a god, or something like that? So I
Right.
honestly want to find just more understanding, because to be spiritual or religious or cultural, all those things, I think there's a place where you can find balance where people can coexist.
Facts. I think just to sort of comment on that last thing you said. I honestly, philosophically speaking, I don't think it's possible to not be religious and exist in a creation made up of information and made up of order. I don't think it's possible philosophically. I don't think it's even possible, demonstrably scientifically. I think people that say they are not religious or that they're atheists, I think they're being disingenuous, and I'll backtrack to sort of some of the other topics we're talking about, not wanting to veer off, but just it may be a useful context. But for example, if a Hebrew Israelite or Christian or Muslim says that they believe that God created everything, and that's why you see order, because it's consistent with our experience with engineering and what happens as a result of intelligent engineering and design. You will see order, you will see parts working together, you may see complexity, but you'll see sort of an overall function to things that's different than, say, just the aftermath of a tornado, for example. If a tornado is random, and it just has energy, it just sort of moves randomly, and it will tend to destroy things and it will cause disorder. But the house and the structure before the tornado passes through, right, it's going to have plumbing, electricity, and all this and that, and people will go in and out, and there's sort of a purpose there, and there's an order, and there can be complexity. I think that when we back up and look at the universe, um, not just sort of DNA, what happens in the body of persons and organisms and the structure and the little missions that the micro machines go on when you look under microscopes, and even sort of the order of the solar system to the galaxy, and gravity, and whatever, strong weak nuclear forces, everything is synchronized. There's so much order to it that if a person comes along and says, I don't believe there was a super intelligence that came before all of this, I think that it came out of nothing, came out of a big bang, and then it sort of organized itself, and it turned into stars, and it made life, and they turned into fish, and then monkeys, and then eventually humans.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's no way. That sounds preposterous sort of on its face if you apply the same model to anything else. Like if you walk home and say, my house built itself.
Right.
I mean, that there's sort of a supernatural aspect to that,
Right.
because we know that's something that's not natural. It's not natural for a house to build itself, much less establish all the plumbing and everything like that. Put solar panels on the roof. We know it takes intelligent effort to do that, but if we claim that it happened and then we give it millions of years, eventually the house made itself, it's not likely to happen. In fact, with more time, it's likely to become more disorganized.
Mm-hmm.
But we atheists apply this as as a valid explanation for our existence. They apply it as a valid explanation to their own consciousness, as a explanation for how their own consciousness came about. And even the brain with which they say there's no God had to have arisen in all its complexity, which is even less likely than even a house building itself, or a car for
Mm-hmm.
that matter. For a brain to build itself will require much more. But anyway, I digress. I'd say that to mean sort of being religious is something that I think people don't always quite understand. So even the atheist believes in supernatural, inevitably. And
Right.
whether or not you become organized and try and sort of define the personality of that religion, or if you say it's Muhammad, or you say it's Yeshua, or you say it's, Buddha or somebody, or the Great Spirit, these are human efforts at defining and putting a person or personality to the creative force and the intelligence that supersedes our reality. And I don't think I think it's inescapable. So oftentimes, if you get into sort of debates with atheists or just people that are from different religions, oftentimes it's gonna come down to properly more of who do you what is the person behind that creative power So even an atheist would have to say the Big Bang.
Right.
Right? The Big Bang thought it all through and started everything and did it. They might say the Big Bang is not conscious, but it's still a creative explanatory power. It's something that preceded everything and needed information actually to encode things. And I don't think they can get around that.
Right.
Big Bang, multiverses, all this stuff they come up with. But yeah, man, I digress. It's just
No.
interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting, and that's why I think it's worth talking about, putting some time into, um, because it can get real confusing, especially when there's a lot of information out there, but there's also a lot of misleading information or just misinformation in general. So I think it's important to kind of get some of the facts out there, which is kind of like what I said. I don't want to get too far in depth on anything specifically right now because I do want to put the time into, really gathering the facts. Um, and how they affect society, especially the Black community, a group of people who are basically in desperation. They're desperately searching for meaning and purpose outside of you were a slave, because once people become more conscious, they just know that's not true. So it's easy to fall into the hands of almost anything with the history, you know because now you just want to connect to something because you have more meaning. So with that being said, I understand why Black people, a lot of times, they'll believe in certain Christianity or Islamic religions, or astrology. The list goes on. They'll believe in these things with all their heart, and that's not a it's not a diss, but it's something that we have to be aware of, because we can be vulnerable and fall into the hands of false religions, or false teachings of a religion, and we won't have a clear enough mind to differentiate the difference between these things, and then we'll take offense when people try to enlighten us or just give us more information about something that we think we know, because the last thing you want to hear when you think you found the truth is that it might not be true, especially when you come from a background of people telling you lies about where you come from. So I think that that cultural connection and religious connection always seems to impact the Black community in one way, because a lack of culture a lot of time leads us to religion because of that structure like that you speak of. We kind of seek that natural structure, but being that so much has been taken away from us, we can be misled real easily.
Yeah, I agree. One interesting note on what you just said. If we assume that culture and religion can intersect at different times, and sometimes what we look at as religion actually reflects someone's culture. So, say for example, the white Jesus, the European Jesus, who we know, and you know, I don't, no offense to anybody, but Caesar Borgia
Right.
was the original model for that painting that was commissioned by the Roman Catholic powers that be as part of the Renaissance after they kicked the Moors and the out of Spain
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. That represents a culture, and it represents a uh, a cultural effort. The Renaissance of bringing back the European to prominence after they kicked the Moors out of the Iberic Peninsula. Okay, that is a cultural aspect from the dominant culture that worked its way into the dominant religion. Now, what does it say when one people's culture dominates their religion? In other words, like this, I mean, is that going to be wholesome to other cultures when they partake of that religion? And one example is, for example, say you have a river, you have a Nile.
Mm-hmm.
The river itself is a source of life. It comes from the heavens, it rains down, it gathers, and it flows across the surface of the earth. And people can go to that river and they can get water, right? They can get something that in reality is going to be better for them. So they're going to grow things from it, they're going to drink from it, etc. Now, if someone goes upstream of the river and they add an ingredient to the river that is something that's healthy to them, like say they start to put cow's milk into the river, that cow's milk, we know there are certain people that are more lactose intolerant and certain people that, can thrive more on milk. This is a crude example. But
Mm-hmm.
once that goes into the river, that cow's milk is something that's supposed to be specific to that group of people, right?
Right.
And even if it doesn't do them well, even if it's something they simply believe in that's particular to them, it should not be in the river, because everybody downstream now, when they take from that river, they're going to also take something that is not specifically good for them. So if we look at a creative God who creates things, that is a source that can be a source of wholesomeness for people, because people need that. Whether they're an atheist, they need something to believe in, because something has to give meaning to life and creation. I mean, people can try and exist without ultimate meanings, but they usually wind up sort of in relative madness or do what they want to do, and it doesn't really work out well typically.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have a religion that's been tainted upstream by a dominant culture, there are bound to be aspects in that religion, since it came from a different culture, that will not be wholesome to the body of people that are not part of that dominant group. Case in point, we would say the image of a white Christ. Now, that image of a white Christ comes from the dominant culture. Now, it's not harmful to a white male necessarily, or even to a white female, because it can be interpreted as part of their family, and it can give a sort of an image of divinity and validity to their own potential in this world.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you are a young black male or black female, now you want God, but now it has this image of a white Christ that has been added to it. And while you can find and establish relationship with God per se, it comes leavened with this image of a white deity, which is hostile towards you in reality. I mean, when you have certain encounters, or you encounter discrimination, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
there's a consistent image between your oppressor and the deity, the image of the deity. So sometimes what I mean is, like, we have to be careful to ferret out the influence of culture in religion, especially when it's not our native culture in the religion. So what that means for black people, um, based on what you're saying, is sometimes what we'll do is we'll gravitate in our search for connecting with God and finding ultimate meaning and purpose. Sometimes what we'll do is we will adopt religious structures and systems that are systematically hostile to who we are naturally. So we'll gravitate to a culture and religion that has a white Christ, that drinks milk, that eats pork chops, or whatever
Mm-hmm.
a person wants to talk, however we want to, not casting judgment,
Right.
but bacon and cheddar cheese omelets, at vacation Bible school, or whatever.
Right.
So there's aspects and components of that religious structure and system that in reality they wind up manifesting as high blood pressure, heart disease, self-hatred, who's those niggas down the block, right? They don't look nothing like Jesus to me, sort
Mm-hmm.
of mentality. And oftentimes when we look at things, I don't think the ultimate truth should be harmful that way. When we know we found God, there should not be any intrinsic harmful aspects to it. it should fit who we are, like a garment
Hmm.
that's cut and made for us to wear. And oftentimes we're so influenced by the preeminent culture that it sort of misinforms our search for God.
Right.
So I took a
One.
couple notes while you were talking, and just tidbits. I won't keep talking, but this that saying when they say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree,
Hmm.
when people feel disconnected, we come from a source and somewhere, presumably, and when we get away from that, we can't go too far from that. We're going to always look to be connected. That saying, well, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Well, we know apples come from the tree uh, properly, and people trying to separate from religiosity um, tends to cause them to sort of wither in
Hmm.
isolation. And I mean, even atheists. Truth is not intimidated, but can be offended at times. So, yeah, like when you talk about different religious groups, like if I know who I am, I can speak to a brother that's a Muslim or in Islam.
Right.
Why? Because if I'm certain about who I am, that means I have truth. Now, if I know the truth, why would I be intimidated to even have a conversation with someone else? It would be like me saying, okay, I'm a man and I know that God exists. Now, if I'm certain of that, I'm not intimidated by speaking with an atheist.
Right.
At least when it comes to if there's something we're supposed to do, we're going to work on a project. We're going to figure out the best way to get this car to run or to make this garden work. He doesn't intimidate me in the least because I'm solid in who I am and what I know because that's what the truth is. Certain things, so I wouldn't have a problem talking to brothers that are from Islam or even black folks or anybody who says
Right.
they're Hindu or whatever. you know there are certain points of conflict we might have according to if we were to actually try and dialogue and debate things, right? Because certain things are going to be true and certain things are going to be false.
Right.
But I see that as that's the importance of knowing and understanding and acquiring the truth so that we can deal with each other without these sort of conflicts that seem to have drawn lines in the sand along religion.
Yeah.
We're fighting because okay, they're his Hebrew Israelites on the corner cursing, or this brother is Islam, or this person is that, and it sort of keeps us segregated. And I think ultimately that's a testament of the insecurity
Hmm.
and not being solid in our knowledge of who we are.
Yep. I think that sums it up pretty good. And one thing I did want to kind of jump into that you kind of was talking about, just the difference in types of characteristics of people who practice certain religions. Like you were talking about the Israelite that kind of stand on the corner, and people who've encountered, those type of people know exactly what we're talking about. So I won't get too in depth of it, but I start to notice that with religion, because of the infusion of other people's cultures, a lot of times you get two sides of every religion almost, where you have this one side of people that say they're practicing the religious the right way, and then you have this extremist side. It seems like so there's a Christianity, then there's a extremist Christianity, then there's Muslims, and then there's extremist Muslims, and then you have the black Israelites or Hebrew Israelites, and then you kind of have this extremist group, and it seems to kind of always follow that pattern where you have these two different types kind of disassociate from each other, and I think that causes confusion as well because you know I actually had to encounter Muslims on a real life basis to understand the difference between how they disassociated with what America was calling Muslims at a time where they were just saying Muslim terrorists, and they was associating those two words almost as if they were
Right.
synonymous. And so in my mind, not knowing, not being educated about it, I had to actually encounter people who were Muslim and kind of explain in depth why those people claim to be Muslims or why they believe in the same religion. However, they don't practice, a certain way. And I had to think about like, well, that makes sense because even with Christians, you'll have people who say, "Oh, you ain't no Christian if you do X, Y, Z," as if Christians have to be perfect in a sense. And then you have people who they'll criticize Christians more harshly because they don't
Right.
understand that there are some people who practice Christianity, accordingly to the Bible, and they never have tried to put on a persona of perfection versus people who practice Christianity and they think that to be a Christian means perfection, and then they make the other Christians look bad, so everybody want to attack the people who are, I think they had a recent thing with Kurt Franklin. Apparently, he cursed at somebody, at his son or something. And I just kind of I never looked into it, but people were saying like they were really criticizing him heavily for like using profane language. And I thought it was kind of interesting. Like, whoa, well, are they expecting like, is there some kind of insinuation that Christians are perfect or that they can't be Christian if they mess up, or I don't know. And then the same thing with kind of the Hebrew Israelites, where you see people will pass judgment on the entire phrase. If you say you're a Hebrew Israelite, or if you say you're a Hebrew or anything, people kind of look at you like, oh, you one of those people. And you're like, well, no, not really, because we practice this way or we do things like this, and we really don't associate with those people. So, is there any comments you would have to, or that you can think of making on that?
Couple things I would just say to like what you said. Like I agree. I think you're spot on. A lot of things are observations that we can make in the world around us. A lot of things are obvious, right? It's obvious that you have, say, within the vein of Hebrew Israelites, which already is sort of distinguished or defined, whether it's from inside or without, as black Hebrew Israelites. Okay, and then you have the brothers on the corner that's cursing and say nobody that's not part of that original vine is going to be able to make it into the kingdom. So nobody that's not melanated or part of the original tribes of Judah are going to make it. And then you have the other sort of the more, which is actually I believe more common and not. It's just the brothers on the corner get more airtime for some reason, but you got more Black Americans, especially, that are awakening to themselves and claiming uh, to be descendants of that. I mean, genetically, and so consequently are practicing and attempting to follow and do history and research. So you have these, but they're not claiming that hey, only Black people can make it. Right? They're saying sort of everybody is going to make it or has an opportunity, except typically the identifiable Hebrew Israelites will be sort of the leaders in the world. Sort of the same way you have a certain group of people that tend to lead the world now. And there's a typical aspect that you can ascribe to that person, sort of where they come from, their genetic legacy. And, you can sort of track that and you look around at the dominant culture of the world. It's not just a spirit, there are actual people that carry out things in reality. And then you have that sort of variance of extremes, and things in the middle. And the same with, like you said, with the Islamic faith, you have people that are identified as extremists. That the term has been used like interchangeably, almost with terrorists, like you said, a certain profile ascribed to them. And then on the other end, like many people who don't have conversations or encounters with the average person, the average Muslim, or the average person that practices that faith. They have a skewed vision of them because, again, that extremist profile seems to get way more airtime. What I would say is that that's reality. uh Philosophically speaking, it seems like that's just sort of part and parcel of any religion or belief system,
Mm-hmm.
because what you have in actuality sort of going back to that allegory or the metaphor of the river, you have people that exist, and you have people that exist sort of with their own consciousness, with their own will. And when they come to the river, it's not that the river is going to thoroughly take them over and cause them to be pure. What's going to happen is the person will come to the river and they'll draw from it. But what they decide to do with those waters is going to be, it's going to be specific to that person. So if a person is into growing plants, or they just want to irrigate their fields, or they just want water to drink, that would be sort of the most inoffensive way to use a river, right? It'll be where that person is actually taking in from it, it's becoming part of who they are, and it's sort of an inoffensive thing, right? To where it's productive, they're going to grow fruit and all this.
Mm-hmm.
But a person that's, say, into making let's say fire water, they want to make fire water because they want to go get some people drunk, right?
Mm-hmm.
They want to get drunk themselves. Well, we know what fire water was, used for by and large at one point, and still is. But see, it's not that the river itself is corrupt initially, is that the people that go and draw from it, they're gonna sort of take that having the ability and freedom to draw from it, they're going to sort of take that and they're going to skew it. It's going to wind up fitting the purpose of what they want to do.
Right.
So
That's a
I
good one.
think, yeah. So I think that when we're talking about, you get these extremes because, for example, if you have, and this is not to play, angel's advocate or anything,
Right.
but if you have a group of people that has an experience of being oppressed, literally in reality, so they say they're in a ghetto,
Mm-hmm.
say they get beat, and say there's no local economy there. Say they have to either sell drugs or their bodies, or they have to turn to do things that are not good in order to thrive and survive. I mean, materially, to actually get food.
Right.
And there's rats and roaches there and everything. Well, when they draw from that that uh, metaphorical river, what's going to typically wind up happening is the same way when you pour water into a vessel, the water's going to sort of, not only is it going to fill the vessel, which is a good thing, but it's going to sort of take a form of what condition that vessel is in reality. So if you look at brothers on the corner that's lashing out, all right, in the name of God,
Mm.
against who has traditionally and historically been their oppressors, that's an instance of what you could call extremism, but it's also parallel to those people's experience in reality. So
Right.
they may have had an extreme experience in reality.
Right.
And so when they come to God, per se, they may still be heavy handed. Now
Right.
it'll be God, okay, we'll put God in air quotes, like not for me, but for maybe some of
Right.
the listeners,
Right.
is ultimately going to be the judge of, okay, what's right or wrong there, you know, or understandably they're lashing out. Uh, or even with Islam, I mean, when we do case and history studies about what happens in, the the so-called Middle East, the targeted Middle East, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, certain other places as a result of a global economic dominance,
Mm-hmm.
right? That involves economic hitman and then war machines and the extraction of natural resources from places. What's going to happen is the oppression and the poverty that ensues is going to breed more desperate situations. And that will go for whether the person finds God or not.
Mm-hmm.
But that's more indicative of the person's condition in reality, I think, than, you can point to God and say, okay, look what God does.
Right.
Or look at what Islam does to those people.
Right.
or look at what being a Muslim does, or look at what being a Christian does. It's often more about what the culture is doing with that than when they weaponize, God.
Yeah.
So that was just sort of my
No, that's good, man. That's real good. Just clarify, and I think that's why it's important to have these conversations, without it turning into arguments. But kind of like you said, putting the word God in air quotes, like those type of things have to be talked about, because those are the, you can say something as simple as that and really turn a lot of people off. Like they just kind of, just by the choice of word that you use to define, or to define your a divine power, which some people can be talking about the same entity, but however, because of so much cultural confusion about what words to use and what not to use, and actually the the severity in some religions, like you have to say the right, you have to call on the right God. So it is important. It's not something to be taken lightly. However, sometimes when you talk to people and they can be so hypersensitive over it because they want to be right, or they want to be following the right rules to their religion, you can turn a lot of people off simply by using the word God versus, Allah or Yah, or the variations of ways to call on a divine power, because of the differences that comes with the religious texts of those gods. So I think it's important that we talk about those key components, and like I said, we will dive deeper into those things on another episode. But this is an introduction. And another thing that I did want to talk about was, I would say, I don't want to say distorted context, but some religious texts may have been, the tampering of certain religious texts, where the religion itself can be genuine and pure, but when you have tampering or the potential allegations of tampering with certain texts, how much damage that can do to a religious reputation. So all of those things I think that we really want to tackle and dive into when we talk about these topics in depth. But right now, again, we don't want to turn too many people off, and we are trying to utilize this to create more understanding than division. So
facts.
unfortunately, we do want to be a little more cautious, but it's not like we're afraid to talk about these topics. But because we come in with a peaceful mind, and we really don't want to cause more disorder in a world that has a lot of disorder, we are taking our time on this subject for that reason. But that's the only reason, because it is to enlighten people and not to just attack people in any kind of way.
Facts. And I just want to throw out there too, like as we talk about things, obviously, I don't presume to know everything, and I don't believe that none presumes to know everything. So this is sort of a reasoning where respectful dialogues or contributions, intellectual contributions, are welcome. We are not uh, intimidated or afraid or offended by things. Like I said, when you have dialogue and you're talking about things, that's the whole point of it. I even think a healthy debate ought to welcome either additional information or sometimes information that could seem to be contradictory. But
Right,
everything, by the end of the day, at the end of the thing, the pursuit is to gain knowledge and insight.
right,
I don't believe that God, whether God is sentient information, as I believe, or uh, unconscious randomness, big bangs, as some people believe. In either case, I don't believe that God is threatened by human beings' pursuit of knowledge and understanding.
mm-hmm,
And it takes, you got to grow up to be able to do that, because if you go to a kindergarten and you look at how the people sort of have debates, a lot of it is done from places of emotion, and a lot of it is done from personal experiences of the individual. So a child might say, you don't do that. My mama said, you put the grease in first.
Hmm.
And they're going to argue with that other kid. But that's based on their feelings and their personal experiences.
Right.
But as you go up through the grades, eventually you should come to groups of people that argue more from intellectual standpoints, whereas that child 20 years later shouldn't be saying, my mama said put the grease first.
Right.
Should be saying, okay, well, what facts do you have to back up that, you know,
That would
pork
change
grease is
anything. Right. Like,
what do you, are there any health studies that back up your position that,
right.
you shouldn't put pig lard in back in the can and then,
Right.
it
Exactly.
should take the form of a more of an intellectual approach. And that's what we aim for here.
Yeah. So yeah, that's perfect. And I will kind of this will be kind of the last thing that I'm kind of throw out there before we wrap this up, because like I said, I was gonna keep this a little shorter because it's an intro. One of the last things I want to say, I'll dabble into a little bit of what I believe, because I feel like that will help the public kind of understand where I'm coming from. But as far as with black people, especially not necessarily religion, but I'm a person who don't necessarily believe that all black people come from one part of the earth. And I know that sometimes can be something that people will kind of try to not necessarily argue aggressively, but they will kind of give them the big eyes where they're like, "What you talking about?" Um, but
Facts.
yeah. So I'm like, I don't necessarily think it was just all black people was in Africa and then spread out. I I feel that black people are very natural, so I kind of look at the parallels with other things in nature. So even like a fruit tree, like there's some fruit that grow in certain regions that don't really grow in other regions. Different types of animal species and fishes. So when you look at those things, you know that they were created by an entity or something. And I feel that when it comes to black people, that we could have originated from different parts of the earth. And how we traveled and migrated throughout time, I think, is a super unknown, and it's something that a lot of people are figuring out. Just different types of information that is really kind of bridging those gaps. So one thing for sure is that we know even more today than I would say probably a lot of people know within the last 100 years, is that even in America, they're starting to find human remains of African people, black people that were here long before the voyage that Christopher Columbus made, almost 200 years before. So with that being said, they know that there was a black presence even on this land before slavery. That's not really talked about. In addition to what happened, like I said, at least 200 years after, you have this transatlantic slave trade. So those are the type of things that will kind of get me going, where I would look into it, not necessarily from a religious point of view, but just that's more of a cultural thing. Like I said, to me, that's not something that I would put against religion in any kind of way. So if a religious said that, all black people started in Africa, I wouldn't argue somebody with this information. But culturally, when it comes to, who we are as a people and trying to reconnect with who we are and all those things, I think that those points are pretty valid. Again, that's something that I will get more in depth in on another episode. So I'll let you kind of say your piece to wrap up, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that's valid. I think that's, I'm the type that I always keep my ear to the ground, keep an eye out and everything. So sometimes, like what you just said, it comes as a surprise to me sometimes, low level shocker that people still don't know some sort of these obvious things, right? Um, that not to mention that the book they came before Columbus, and it talks about the Olmec statues that are in Central America, parts of Mexico that are clearly what we would call Afrocentric busts
Hmm.
of the seafaring people that were all across were all over the planet. Uh, they there was obviously cultural exchanges. There are artifacts in Central America, Latin America that are that would otherwise be Afrocentric in origin. Some correlations between what you find in terms of arts and artifacts in Africa, and then you dig some of the same things up in other places on the planet,
Hmm.
and sort of the illustrations that you can find in native depictions across the world. Now, the thing is, obviously, uh, what we call Black people were all over the world, and there was a technology, and there was the ability to sail and chart the stars and all these things long before Columbus, because history tells us, when we're honest, uh, that Columbus, Portugal, and these other Spain, they didn't even learn how to sail and chart the stars until they learned it from the Moors that were there in Spain. These
Right.
people didn't even know how to sail beyond the trade. I mean, they could sort of
Right.
follow trade winds, but they didn't know how to chart the stars. So
Right.
they never made it. When Columbus decided he was going to go to India and wound up in in Central America and some of his other lackeys in the U.S., they weren't able to even attempt that until they learned star charting from the Moors. So I mean, yeah, that's some of the stuff we can get into. I can't believe there's still people that think that all melanated people, to the degree that we are monolithic. That we were just all in one part in Africa, and then the slave trade came, and now we're all sort of subsequent, watered down, bastardized Africans.
Right.
It's sort of, but this is what I
Yeah.
would say. This is what you said. It triggered when you deal with someone who is the gatekeeper of information, meaning if you and I want to go learn something and we go to the library and there's a librarian there, and that person, right, is not of our culture, and that person sort of is in decision making power or control of what books we get and we don't. Okay, there, or that person also writes books or whatever. We'll have a challenge of trying to piece things together when we have to go through that librarian because they're a gatekeeper. And I think nowadays we're sort of waking up to information, but we're using gropingly sort of intuition and common sense and sort of philosophical truths and things. Some things make sense, some things don't, to sort of guide us in our search because we haven't been part of that in crowd and in circle. So once Europeans took over the scene, they sort of have dictated, yeah, Black people, they came from Africa, and their story, and Black Americans, their story starts with slavery in 1700s or whatever, 1600s, and they tell us things, and there are whole books written about it and everything that seem to concur, but we're always ultimately dealing with that librarian. But I think that as time goes on, when we sort of storm the gates, there's so much information out there that I think is just shocking. And actually, a lot of things are right out there in plain sight. It's just that the sort of orientation of the way we think and we've been trained to think causes us to miss a lot of things that are otherwise right in front of us.
Yeah. No, that's true, man. That's perfect though. Yeah, so we're gonna wrap that up with that. Like I said, we're gonna really get into this. So we want everybody to stick with it. But we wanted to kind of lay that platform before we just dove into some deep conversation. But we will get there. So
Y'all don't be scared.
don't be scared.
Don't
But
be
be
scared.
prepared.
Don't get in your feelings.
None
Don't
of
be
that.
scared.
Right.
You know, don't hit the off button,
Yeah, still hit the subscribe button and the like button,
There you
keep it
go.
going. And then,
Smash that like button.
yeah, so we'll be good.